My friend Rob and I have bake-offs for bread and butter pudding in particular. Now, usually it's sweet. He puts all sorts of strange things in his, but I'm going to really ruffle up the feathers today by showing you a bread and butter pudding that's savoury. This is such a great way to use up some stale bread, and the rest of the ingredients in here usually you'll have in your pantry, like some canned tomatoes and eggs and cream that are in the fridge already. Now, to start with, we need to strain the tomatoes. I've got whole peeled tomatoes here, and I want to use them both. I want to use the juice to soak the bread, and then the whole tomatoes I'm going to use to garnish this bread and butter pudding. So just with the back of a spoon, just strain it and just use a spoon to separate the two different textures of tomato. And I'll use a second can for this. Now, the amount of tomatoes will depend on how much bread you're going to be using and how big your bread and butter pudding is. So I'm actually making quite a large one to feed 4 people, so 2 cans is absolutely perfect. Now let's get on to the bread. I like to use sourdough bread that's a day or 2 old. With bread and butter pudding, if you're doing a sweet or a savoury one, you need the bread to be a little bit stale. The reason you need it to be stale is so it holds its shape. If it's too fresh, it'll get a little bit mushy. So the older the bread, I say, the better. Now I'm going to cut 8 medium thick slices. And before I start dunking it into the tomato juice, I'm just going to use a little bit of garlic to wipe over the bread. When garlic is raw like this, it has a very strong flavour. So just wiping it over, just as I'm doing here, you will taste it. So don't mince it and don't put it into the dish. We're just wanting to perfume this bread with the scent of the garlic. Now we can start dunking this bread into this tomato juice. So just combine that. I'm going to season it with just a hint of salt because tomatoes love salt. Now each piece of bread can go in, strain off some of the excess liquid, and then it can go into a greased baking dish. And now that it's been drenched in the tomatoes, you can see how pliable the bread is. So we do want to squish it into all the sides. So I'm going to continue this until this baking dish is completely lined with this bread. Now the salami is going to give this a really nice saltiness. You can use suppressor, you can use Hungarian salami like I'm using today. The most important thing here though is slice it really thin because when it cooks in the oven, you want it to melt a bit, especially that little bit of fat in there, which is going to flavour this bread and butter pudding. You could even use some spicy salami to introduce a little bit of chilli into this dish. And then I'm just going to layer this, just scatter this salami in and around the pieces of tomato bread there. It's starting to look fantastic. Now that I've done this with the salami, I'm going to do the same thing with fresh basil. Now I'm going to use some basil at the end, but a little bit now when it's cooking is a great idea too. So just tuck it underneath the bread and don't chop this, please. It smells so good when you're just tearing it between your fingers. Now for the remaining tomatoes here, I'm going to scatter the tomatoes for different textures of tomato here and squeeze them with your fingers so a lot of the juice comes out. Now we've got to get on to the custard. Now a bread and butter pudding is not a bread and butter pudding without a delicious custard to go with it. So good quality free range eggs. I need 3 whole eggs for this recipe and they can go first of all into the bowl. And instead of just using milk, I like to use a combination of milk and cream because I don't want it to be too omelette-y. If you added the cream, it becomes a little bit more silky and lush. So 300 millilitres of cream, thickened cream, and a little bit of milk. And now I'm going to whisk this together. You want to break up all those eggs in there so it really starts to change colour to that light orange. It's looking great. I'll also add some cheese now. Now my cheese of choice is some pecorino, but you could also use Parmesan cheese for this. And I'm also going to grate some straight over the bread. And after I've poured the custard all over this bread and butter pudding, it goes into a hot oven so we get that crispy outside border on the bread, 200 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes. This is one very beautiful bread and butter pudding. I love how rich in colour it is, and I can see the speckles of salami there. I'm going to add a little bit more pecorino, just a small amount, and some more fresh basil. So we've got the cooked basil there and fresh basil that I'm just going to tear over the top there. I'll break up some of those leaves. That is an Italian delight. What I love about it is it's all basic ingredients. We've all got eggs in the fridge, a little bit of stale bread there, some cheese, and the best thing about bread and butter pudding is that it's really crispy on the top and it's really soufflé and very soft in the centre. So you've got two textures here, and I think Rob is going to love this because he loves cheese just as much as me. Look how gooey that centre is. Oh, so good, so inexpensive. This is a must-try bread and butter pudding.